My sister-in-law tried to poison me when I was pregnant. Justice served. True story. Welcome, dearest souls, new to our family. Share your beautiful name below. We can't wait to meet you. To our cherished returning family, you are the heart of our journey, and we're so grateful for you. Subscribe to stay part of this incredible path of love, hope, and healing. Every story we share is a gift chosen just for you. Now, take a deep, loving breath and let the story of a lifetime begin. The Modern Art Gallery stood like a beacon against the Chicago skyline, its glass walls reflecting the amber hues of a September sunset. Inside, the annual Visions of Tomorrow showcase was in full swing, but Aubrey Mitchell's attention was elsewhere. Her dark fingers traced the edge of her exhibition catalogue, a nervous habit she'd developed during her years as a rising curator in a field that rarely welcomed faces like hers. At 28, Aubrey had already made a name for herself in Chicago's competitive art scene. Her latest exhibition, Shattered Perspectives, had drawn critical acclaim, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still an outsider looking in. Her natural coils were pulled back in a professional bun, and her emerald green dress, carefully chosen to make a statement without being too bold, seemed to whisper her daily mantra: belong, but don't overshadow. The gallery hummed with the sophisticated murmur of the city's elite, their voices mixing with the soft jazz floating through hidden speakers. Aubrey moved through the space with practiced grace, pausing occasionally to engage with potential donors and fellow curators. Her mentor, Victoria Hayes, had always said that success in the art world was equal parts talent and navigation. Ms. Mitchell, a voice cut through her thoughts, warm and rich like aged bourbon. Your curation of the modern minimalism section is extraordinary. Aubrey turned, a practiced smile ready on her lips, only to have it freeze in place. The man before her was tall, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal suit that screamed bespoke tailoring, but it was his eyes that caught her, kind, intelligent, and the color of dark honey under gallery lights. Brandon Cooper, he introduced himself, extending a hand. I'm an architect with Reynolds and Associates, the firm handling the new Performing Arts Center. Aubrey's professional interest piqued. She'd been following the project closely, admiring the bold fusion of classical and contemporary elements in the designs. Guilty as charged, his smile was disarming, genuine in a way rarely seen in these circles. Though tonight I'm more interested in your interpretation of space through art, the way you've arranged Jameson's sculptures to create dialogue with Chen's paintings. It's architectural in its own right. For the next hour, they lost themselves in conversation. Brandon's knowledge of art surprised her, matching her passion with genuine insight. They moved from piece to piece, their discussion flowing from artistic theory to personal philosophies. He told her about growing up in a family of old money, but wanting to make his own mark. She shared stories of her grandmother, an art teacher in Southside Chicago, who'd planted the seeds of her career. My sister Aurora would say I'm spending too much time with one person, Brandon mentioned, glancing at his watch with obvious reluctance. She's the self-appointed guardian of family propriety. Sounds charming, Aubrey remarked dryly, earning a laugh that drew curious glances from nearby patrons. She's traditional, Brandon said diplomatically, but I've never been good at following traditions that don't make sense. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Would you like to get coffee sometime? There's this little place off Michigan Avenue that displays local artists. I'd love to hear your thoughts on their curation. The practical part of Aubrey's brain, the part that had navigated her through a world of subtle prejudices and not-so-subtle barriers, warned her about the complications. She'd seen the way certain society matrons had watched their interaction, their expressions a mix of surprise and disapproval. Brandon Cooper clearly came from a world of privilege, and she knew from experience how those worlds often viewed people like her. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not as a black woman who'd managed to succeed in a white-dominated field, but as an equal, a kindred spirit who saw beauty in the careful arrangement of space and meaning. "I'd like that," she heard herself say, surprising them both with her directness. They exchanged numbers, and as Brandon walked away, Aubrey caught Victoria's knowing look from across the room. Her mentor raised an eyebrow, a silent question in her expression. "Don't start," Aubrey mouthed, but she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and networking, but Aubrey's mind kept drifting back to their conversation. It wasn't just Brandon's obvious charm or his intelligence that had captured her attention. It was the way he'd seemed to truly see her work, to understand the stories she was trying to tell through her curation. As she left the gallery hours later, the city lights sparkled against a velvet sky. Her phone buzzed with a message. "The coffee place is called Canvas and Coffee. Tomorrow at 2? Brandon Aubrey paused on the gallery steps, the cool autumn air carrying the promise of change. She thought about her grandmother's words. "Art isn't just about beauty, baby girl. It's about seeing the truth of things, even when that truth isn't pretty." Looking back at the gallery where their paths had crossed, Aubrey felt the weight of that truth. She was standing on the edge of something significant, something that could either break her heart or remake her world. With fingers that trembled slightly, she typed her reply, "See you at 2. The city continued its nighttime symphony around her. Cars honking, trains rumbling in the distance, people laughing as they spilled out of nearby restaurants. But for Aubrey, everything had shifted slightly, like a painting tilted just enough to catch the light differently. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her life's canvas would begin to fill with colors she'd never dared to dream of, starting with the warm, honey brown of a stranger's kind eyes. What she also didn't know was that across town, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Aurora Cooper was already planning ways to ensure her brother's latest, inappropriate infatuation would never blossom into anything more. The stage was set for a story of love, prejudice, and the kind of courage that comes from fighting for what the heart knows is right, even when the world seems determined to prove it wrong. Chapter 2. Coffee Stains and Destiny. The Price of Love's First Steps. The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the weathered brick walls of Canvas and Coffee, a charming hideaway tucked between Chicago's towering skyscrapers. Aubrey arrived 15 minutes early, her heart performing an erratic dance beneath her burgundy blazer. The cafe's interior was a testament to local artistry, walls adorned with rotating exhibitions, mismatched vintage furniture carefully curated to create an atmosphere of bohemian sophistication. She chose a corner table, its distressed wood surface bearing the marks of countless conversations. Her fingers traced the coffee ring stains, permanent memories of meetings, breakups, and perhaps even love stories that had unfolded in this very spot. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a curator of fine art, found beauty in these imperfect circles. Brandon arrived precisely at 2, looking somehow more approachable in dark jeans and a navy sweater that highlighted his broad shoulders. His smile when he spotted her carried the same warmth she remembered from the gallery, but there was something else there too. A hint of nervousness that made him seem more human, more real. "You found the place," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I was worried my directions weren't clear." The giant coffee cup sculpture outside was a pretty good hint, Aubrey replied, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, "though I have questions about the artist's choice of neon green for the steam." Their laughter mingled with the cafe's ambient buzz. The hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle clinking of cups, the murmur of afternoon conversations. They ordered a lavender latte for her, straight black coffee for him, and fell into the kind of conversation that makes time lose its meaning. Brandon shared stories about growing up in the Cooper family mansion in Lincoln Park, but his tales weren't about privilege. Instead, he spoke about hiding in the library to draw building designs while his sister Aurora hosted debutante tea parties. "I was always the family disappointment," he admitted, with a self-deprecating smile. "Choosing architecture over law or finance was practically heresy." Aubrey found herself opening up about her own journey, growing up in South Side Chicago, raised by her grandmother after losing her parents in a car accident. "Art saved me," she explained, watching the play of emotions across Brandon's face. "My grandmother taught art at the local high school. She would bring home discarded supplies, and together we'd create whole worlds on canvas." The afternoon light shifted, shadows lengthening across their table, but neither made a move to leave. Brandon told her about his first major project, a community center in Detroit that combined sustainable architecture with spaces for public art. Aubrey shared her dreams of creating programs to bring art education to underserved communities. "You know," Brandon said, leaning forward slightly, "I've never met anyone who sees the world quite the way you do. It's like you find stories in every shadow, meaning in every space." The moment was perfect, until Brandon's phone erupted with Aurora's custom ringtone. His expression tightened as he declined the call, but the spell was broken. Reality began seeping back in, bringing with it all the complications they'd momentarily forgotten. "She'll keep calling," Brandon sighed, just as the phone began ringing again. "Aurora has opinions about who I should be spending time with." Aubrey felt the familiar weight settle in her stomach. "And I'm guessing those opinions don't include coffee with someone like me." Someone brilliant, passionate, and genuinely interesting. Brandon's response was immediate, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No, probably not. But I stopped letting Aurora dictate my life choices a long time ago." The phone rang a third time. This time Brandon turned it off completely, the gesture speaking volumes. "I should probably warn you," he said, his voice serious despite his slight smile, "that this might not be easy. My family, especially Aurora, they can be challenging." Aubrey thought about all the barriers she'd already faced in her life. The subtle discrimination, the doubled standards, the constant need to prove herself worthy of spaces others took for granted. "I'm familiar with challenging," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Aurora Cooper was launching her own investigation. Her carefully manicured nails clicked against her keyboard as she dug through social media, searching for anything she could use against the woman who dared to catch her brother's attention. The afternoon stretched into evening, and they finally stepped out into the cooling air. Brandon's hand found hers as they walked, the gesture natural and yet electrifying. They passed a street musician playing "What a Wonderful World" on a saxophone, the melody wrapping around them like a promise. "There's an opening at the Contemporary Art Center next Friday," Aubrey said, trying to keep her voice casual. "If you're interested." "I'd love to," Brandon replied, then hesitated. "But would you mind if we met there? There's a family dinner I can't avoid, but I could leave early." Understanding dawned in Aubrey's eyes. He wanted to keep this thing between them protected, at least for now. Part of her wanted to protest, to demand they face whatever was coming head-on. But she'd navigated enough complex situations to know that sometimes strategic retreat was necessary for ultimate victory. "I'll see you there at 8, she agreed, squeezing his hand gently. They parted ways at the corner, but not before Brandon pulled her into a soft kiss that tasted of coffee and possibilities. Aubrey watched him disappear into the crowd, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Later that night, as Aubrey sat in her apartment reviewing exhibition proposals, her phone lit up with a text from Brandon. "Thank you for making me forget about time today. Can't wait for Friday." She smiled, but before she could reply, another message arrived, this one from an unknown number. "Stay away from Brandon Cooper. You're not welcome in our world." Aubrey stared at the message, her hand trembling slightly. She'd faced prejudice before, but this felt different, more personal. The warm glow of the afternoon dimmed slightly, reality's harsh edges pressing in. But then she looked at the small, abstract painting hanging above her desk, a gift from her grandmother, swirling colors breaking free from rigid lines. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, anything worth having is worth fighting for. The question is, what are you willing to fight for?" Looking at Brandon's message, then at the threatening text, Aubrey made her decision. She wouldn't run, wouldn't hide. If this was going to be a battle, she'd face it with the same grace and determination that had gotten her this far. She typed a reply to Brandon. "Today was perfect. Friday can't come soon enough." The threatening message she left unanswered. Some battles didn't need to be fought with words. Across town, in her penthouse apartment, Aurora Cooper was already plotting her next move. She'd seen the security camera footage from Canvas and Coffee, watched her brother kiss this woman who threatened everything she'd worked to protect. "This ends now," she whispered to herself, reaching for her phone to make some calls. The stage was set for a collision of worlds, old money versus earned success, prejudice versus progress, fear versus love. And in the middle of it all, two people who dared to believe that coffee stains and destiny might just be the beginning of something extraordinary. Chapter 3. The Price of Love. When Worlds Collide, the Contemporary Arts Center buzzed with anticipation on Friday evening, its modernist facade illuminated against Chicago's darkening sky. Aubrey stood near the entrance, her royal blue dress a statement of elegance and defiance. The past week had brought more anonymous messages, each more threatening than the last, but she refused to let fear dim her light. Inside, the exhibition, Breaking Boundaries, showcased works challenging societal norms. Aubrey found bitter irony in how perfectly the theme matched her current situation. She checked her phone again. 8:15 p.m., no message from Brandon. At 8:30, she received a text that made her heart sink. "Family dinner running late. Aurora's making it impossible to leave. I'm so sorry." What Brandon didn't tell her was that Aurora had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to keep him trapped at the family mansion. She'd invited potential clients, arranged for their parents to discuss urgent family matters, and even staged a minor medical emergency with their mother that required Brandon's attention. But Aurora's real masterstroke was already in motion at the gallery. "Aubrey Mitchell?" A smooth voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find a handsome man in his early 30s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. "I'm James Wellington, from the Wellington Foundation. Your reputation precedes you." For the next hour, James proved to be charming company, his knowledge of art impressive, and his interest in her career seemingly genuine. What Aubrey didn't know was that James was Aurora's carefully selected pawn, a man chosen specifically to create a compromising situation. "Let me get you another drink," James offered, moving toward the bar. As he returned, he deliberately stumbled, sending red wine cascading down Aubrey's dress. The moment was perfectly timed, just as Brandon finally arrived at the gallery. "I am so sorry." James apologized profusely, making a show of trying to help clean up, his hands lingering inappropriately long. Cameras clicked in the background, Aurora's hired photographers capturing the scene from multiple angles. Brandon's voice cut through the chaos. Get your hands off her." The gallery fell silent. Aubrey looked up to see Brandon, his face a mask of confusion and hurt, staring at the scene before him. Before she could explain, Aurora appeared at his side, her designer dress and perfectly coiffed hair a stark contrast to Aubrey's wine-stained appearance. "Oh, Brandon," Aurora's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I tried to warn you. These social climbers, they always have an agenda. Look how quickly she moved on when you were delayed." Aubrey stood straight, dignity intact despite the spreading stain. "This isn't what it looks like," she started, but Aurora wasn't finished. "I took the liberty of having you investigated," Aurora announced loudly, pulling out a folder. "Shall we discuss your history of targeting wealthy men? The mysterious donations to your previous exhibitions, the convenient relationships with influential patrons." The folder contained carefully crafted lies, manipulated photos, and twisted versions of Aubrey's professional relationships. Aurora had spent a week building this moment, ensuring maximum public humiliation. But Aurora had underestimated two things: Brandon's trust in his own judgment and Aubrey's resilience. "Are you done?" Aubrey's voice was quiet but carried across the now silent gallery. "Because while you've been plotting this elaborate takedown, your brother and I have been building something real, something that doesn't need your approval or understanding." She turned to Brandon, her heart in her eyes. "I don't know what's in that folder, but I know who I am. I've worked for everything I have. I've never compromised my integrity, not for success, and certainly not for love. If you believe your sister's lies, then you never really knew me at all." Brandon looked from the folder to James, who was now backing away, to Aurora's triumphant smile, and finally to Aubrey, proud, beautiful, and unbroken despite it all. "You're right, Aurora," Brandon said slowly. "I've been blind." Aurora's smile widened, but Brandon wasn't finished. "Blind to how far you'd go to control my life. Blind to the poison you spread in the name of family. But I'm not blind anymore." He moved to stand beside Aubrey, taking her hand. "And I'm done letting you dictate my happiness." The gallery erupted in whispers. James slipped away. His part played. Aurora's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Both of you." "The only regret," Brandon replied calmly, "would be letting fear of your judgment stop me from being with someone extraordinary." He turned to Aubrey, gently wiping a drop of wine from her cheek. "I'm so sorry I was late. Let me take you home." As they left the gallery together, Aurora's voice rang out behind them. "This isn't over." She was right. It wasn't over. This was just the beginning of Aurora's campaign against their relationship. But as Brandon helped Aubrey into his car, their hands intertwined, they both knew some things were worth fighting for. Later that night, in Aubrey's apartment, Brandon held her close on her small balcony overlooking the city. Her dress was ruined, but her spirit was intact. "I should have warned you," Brandon murmured into her hair, "about how far Aurora might go." "I'm not afraid of her," Aubrey replied, though they both knew the stakes had just gotten higher. "You should be," Brandon said seriously. "She won't stop. This is just the opening move." Aubrey turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had chosen her despite everything. "Then we'll face it together. I didn't get where I am by backing down from a fight." What they didn't know was that Aurora was already planning her next attack. In her penthouse, she made calls to gallery owners, donors, and influential art world figures. By morning, Aubrey would find her professional reputation under siege, her upcoming exhibitions mysteriously cancelled, her proposals rejected. But Aurora had made a crucial mistake. In trying to break them apart, she had given them a common enemy, a shared battle that would only strengthen their bond. As the city lights twinkled around them, Brandon and Aubrey shared a kiss that tasted of wine and defiance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had each other, and sometimes love's greatest victories start with its greatest tests. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. When love faces its greatest test. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Aubrey's office at the Chicago Art Institute, where she sat staring at her computer screen in disbelief. 3 major exhibitions, cancelled, 5 potential donors, suddenly unreachable. Her inbox overflowed with polite but firm rejections from galleries that had been courting her just weeks ago. Aurora's influence ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The Cooper family's tentacles reached into every corner of Chicago's elite social circles, and Aurora was pulling every string with surgical precision. "You need to see this," Victoria Hayes, Aubrey's mentor, said grimly as she walked in, tablet in hand. The art blog's headline made Aubrey's stomach churn. "Rising Curators' Questionable Methods Exposed, the Dark Side of Success." The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and half-truths, weaving together carefully selected fragments of Aubrey's career into a narrative that suggested impropriety without making direct accusations. It mentioned her rapid rise in the art world, implying that her success couldn't possibly be based on merit alone. "They're trying to erase everything I've worked for," Aubrey whispered, her fingers tracing the framed photo on her desk, her grandmother standing proud at Aubrey's first gallery opening. 7 years of sacrifice, of proving myself over and over again. Victoria placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Then we fight back. You didn't break barriers by being weak, Aubrey Mitchell." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Brandon. "Have you seen the latest?" His voice was tight with barely contained anger. "Aurora's arranged an emergency board meeting at Reynolds and Associates. They're questioning my judgment, suggesting my personal choices might affect client confidence." Aubrey closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. "Brandon, maybe we should—" "Don't," he cut her off. "Don't even suggest we give them what they want. I'm calling because I have a plan, but I need you to trust me." Trust. Such a simple word for such a complex request. But as Aubrey looked at her grandmother's photo, she remembered something the wise woman had told her. "Love isn't about playing it safe, baby girl. It's about being brave enough to risk everything for what matters most." "I trust you," she said finally. Brandon's plan was bold. He had scheduled a major presentation for the new Performing Arts Center project, one of the firm's most prestigious undertakings. But instead of playing it safe, he intended to incorporate elements of Aubrey's curatorial vision, creating spaces specifically designed to showcase diverse artists and community engagement programs. "It's risky," he admitted. "The board is already looking for reasons to doubt me. But if we succeed, it proves that our partnership makes both of us stronger, not weaker." Meanwhile, Aurora was orchestrating her own movements. She'd discovered something in Aubrey's past, a scholarship controversy from her university days that had been resolved but could be twisted to suit Aurora's narrative. The fact that Aubrey had been cleared of any wrongdoing was irrelevant. The mere suggestion of impropriety would be enough to cast doubt on her integrity. What Aurora didn't expect was for her husband Bryson to start questioning her obsession. "This vendetta isn't healthy," he confronted her one evening. "What are you really afraid of?" Aurora's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand. Everything I've built, everything our family stands for, she threatens all of it. She's different, Bryson. She doesn't belong in our world." "Maybe," Bryson replied quietly. "It's our world that needs to change." The next week became a chess game of moves and counter-moves. While Aurora leaked carefully crafted stories to the press, Aubrey and Brandon worked tirelessly on their joint vision for the Performing Arts Center. Victoria activated her own network, reaching out to artists and curators who had worked with Aubrey, gathering testimonials about her integrity and innovation. The turning point came unexpectedly. One of Aurora's hired photographers, troubled by conscience, came forward with evidence of her orchestrated scene at the gallery. The revelation didn't undo all the damage, but it created cracks in Aurora's carefully constructed narrative. The night before the board presentation, Aubrey and Brandon sat in her small apartment, surrounded by architectural drawings and curatorial notes. The space that had once seemed modest to Brandon now felt like the most authentic place he knew. "Tell me again about your grandmother," he said, watching Aubrey pin up another sketch. "About how she taught art in South Side Chicago." Aubrey's hands stilled. "She believed art could save lives, not just through beauty, but through opportunity. She used to say that every child who learned to create something beautiful learned they had the power to change their world." Brandon stood, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "That's what I love about you. You don't just see art as something to be displayed. You see it as a bridge between worlds." "A bridge your sister seems determined to burn," Aubrey said softly. "Then we'll build it stronger," Brandon replied. "Tomorrow we show them that love doesn't weaken us. It makes us more creative, more innovative, more human." What they didn't know was that Aurora had one more card to play. She had arranged for certain board members to receive anonymous evidence suggesting financial irregularities in Brandon's project proposals. The implications could destroy not just the project, but his entire career. As they worked into the night, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, neither knew that the next day would bring their greatest test yet. Their love, their careers, their very integrity would be questioned in ways they couldn't imagine. But sometimes the darkest shadows come just before dawn, and in the crucible of adversity, true love either breaks or becomes unbreakable. Chapter 5. The Presentation, where truth faces power. The morning of the board presentation dawned with an ominous grey sky over Chicago's financial district. The Reynolds and Associates building stretched toward the clouds, its glass facade reflecting the gathering storm. Inside the building's prestigious 45th floor boardroom, tension crackled like static electricity before a lightning strike. Brandon stood at the window, adjusting his tie for the third time. The weight of the presentation folders in his briefcase felt like lead, each page containing not just architectural plans, but a declaration of love and principles that could cost him everything he'd worked for. 15 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin, his phone buzzed with a message from Aubrey. "Whatever happens today, remember why we're fighting. I love you." Attached was a photo of her grandmother's first art class in Southside Chicago, dated 1975, a group of children from different backgrounds, all creating together. The message was clear. Some battles are bigger than ourselves. The boardroom filled slowly with the power players of Chicago's architectural world. Brandon recognized the subtle power plays in their seating choices, supporters near the front, skeptics clustered together mid-room, and the undecided keeping carefully neutral positions near the back. His father, Richard Cooper, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Aurora swept in last, immaculate in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She took her seat next to their father, spreading out a folder of her own with deliberate care. The slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth sent a chill down Brandon's spine. "Before we begin," Aurora spoke up, her voice carrying that perfect blend of concern and authority she'd perfected over years of social manipulation. "There are some financial irregularities in the project proposals that the board should be aware of." Brandon's heart stuttered, but years of presenting to tough clients kept his face composed. This was Aurora's trump card, but he'd prepared for something like this. "Actually," he said, his voice steady. "I'm glad you brought that up, Aurora. It ties perfectly into the first part of my presentation. Transparency and community impact." He launched into his presentation with a confidence that came from absolute conviction. The Performing Arts Center wasn't just another building. It was a bridge between worlds, a physical manifestation of what happened when different perspectives came together to create something extraordinary. The traditional approach would be to create a space that caters exclusively to the elite, Brandon explained, clicking through slides that showed the evolution of his design. But by incorporating elements that welcome diverse communities, by creating spaces specifically designed to showcase artists from all backgrounds, we're not just building a performing arts center, we're building the future of our city. He introduced Aubrey's curatorial vision, explaining how her expertise in engaging underserved communities through art would transform the center from a monument to privilege into a catalyst for cultural change. The financial projections showed how this inclusive approach would actually increase revenue through broader community engagement and innovative programming. Aurora's face darkened as she realized her brother wasn't just defending his relationship, he was dismantling the very foundations of the prejudice she represented. "This is absurd," she interrupted, standing abruptly. "You're letting your personal relationship cloud your professional judgment. These financial projections are based on speculation and—" "Actually," a new voice cut through the tension. Bryson, Aurora's husband, stepped into the boardroom. "I've reviewed the projections independently. They're not just sound, they're conservative. The potential return on investment is significantly higher than our traditional models." Aurora's head snapped toward her husband, betrayal written across her features. But Bryson wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, pulling out his own folder, "I have evidence that the alleged financial irregularities were fabricated, along with proof of systematic attempts to sabotage both this project and Ms. Mitchell's career." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Richard Cooper raised his hand for silence, his expression grave. "Brandon," he said slowly, "you've taken a significant risk with this proposal. It challenges everything we've traditionally stood for." Brandon straightened his shoulders, ready to defend his vision, but his father wasn't finished. "It also," Richard continued, "represents the kind of innovation and social awareness that will keep this firm relevant for the next generation. I move to approve the project as presented." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. As board members filed out, many stopped to congratulate Brandon, several specifically mentioning their interest in meeting Aubrey to discuss the cultural programming aspects further. Aurora remained seated, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her folder. "This isn't over," she hissed as Brandon passed her. "You have no idea what you've done to this family's reputation." "No, Aurora," Brandon replied quietly. "You have no idea what you've done to yourself." Later that evening, Aubrey hosted a small celebration in her apartment. Victoria was there, along with Bryson, who had finally broken free from Aurora's influence, and a few key supporters from the art world who had stood by Aubrey during Aurora's smear campaign. "A toast," Victoria proposed, raising her glass, "to bridges, both architectural and human." As their friends celebrated around them, Brandon pulled Aubrey onto her small balcony. The storm that had threatened all day had passed, leaving the city washed clean and sparkling. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Aubrey blinked in surprise. "What?" "Not to the family mansion," he clarified quickly. "Let's find our own place. Something that represents both of us. A fresh start." Aubrey looked at him thoughtfully. "You know this isn't the end of it. Aurora won't stop." "No," Brandon agreed. "She won't. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Every time she attacks, we get stronger. We build something new. We prove that love isn't about fitting into someone else's world. It's about creating our own." Inside, they could hear their friends laughing, the sound of genuine joy and acceptance. Aubrey thought about how far they'd come from that first meeting at the gallery, how many battles they'd faced and won together. "Yes," she said simply, reaching up to kiss him. What they didn't know was that Aurora was at that moment sitting in her penthouse, staring at an elaborate plan she'd been developing for months. A plan that would make everything else she'd done seem like mere practice. Because while Brandon and Aubrey thought they'd won the war, Aurora knew it was just beginning. She picked up her phone, dialing a number she'd held in reserve for just this moment. "It's time," she said when the line connected. "I don't care what it costs. I want them destroyed." But even as she plotted, something was shifting in the universe around her. Because sometimes the very actions we take to destroy others end up destroying ourselves instead. And in the warmth of Aubrey's apartment, surrounded by love and acceptance, a new chapter was already beginning to unfold. Chapter 6. Desperate Measures, When Hatred Consumes the Soul. The late autumn wind whipped through Chicago's streets, carrying with it the first bite of winter. In her luxurious penthouse, Aurora Cooper sat in her private study, surrounded by the evidence of her privileged life. But privilege, she had learned, didn't guarantee victory. The failure of her previous attempts to separate Brandon and Aubrey had left her seething with a rage that threatened to consume her. Before her lay an intricately detailed plan, the culmination of months of obsessive plotting. Her network of private investigators had uncovered something that made her previous schemes seem like child's play. It wasn't just about stopping a relationship anymore. It was about complete annihilation. Ms. Cooper, her newly hired private investigator, Marcus Reynolds, spoke from the leather chair across her desk. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" Once we set this in motion. Aurora's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her crystal whiskey glass. "Tell me again what you found about her grandmother's art school." Marcus shuffled through his papers, though he'd memorized the details. Rose Mitchell ran an art program in Southside Chicago from 1975 to 1993. The school received several private grants, including one from the Cooper Foundation in 1989. Aurora's lips curved into a cruel smile. "And the financial records from that period?" "Inconsistent," Marcus replied carefully. "There were discrepancies in how the grant money was used. Nothing was ever proven, but enough to suggest that Aubrey's beloved grandmother wasn't the saint she pretends," Aurora finished. "That the very foundation of her artistic journey is built on fraud." What Aurora didn't know was that at that exact moment, Aubrey and Brandon were creating their own kind of magic. They'd found a historic brownstone in Lincoln Park, not in the elite section where the Cooper mansion stood, but in a vibrant area where artists and young professionals were breathing new life into old buildings. "It needs work," Brandon admitted, standing in what would become their living room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting the potential beneath years of neglect. Aubrey moved through the space, her curator's eye seeing past the peeling wallpaper and scuffed floors. "It's perfect," she breathed. "A blank canvas." They'd spent the afternoon planning renovations, their different perspectives merging into a shared vision. Brandon's architectural expertise complemented Aubrey's artistic sensibilities, creating something uniquely theirs. But their bubble of happiness was about to burst. The next morning, Aubrey arrived at her office to find Victoria waiting with a grave expression. "They're reopening the investigation into the 1989 Cooper Foundation grant," she said without preamble. "There are allegations of misappropriated funds." Aubrey's world tilted. "That's impossible. My grandmother documented everything. She used that money to provide art supplies to kids who couldn't afford them. Aurora's behind this," Victoria stated flatly. "She's not just attacking you anymore. She's going after your grandmother's legacy." The investigation moved with frightening speed, fueled by Aurora's influence and money. Within days, local art blogs were running stories about the historical fraud that had funded one of Chicago's most beloved community art programs. Brandon was furious. "This ends now," he declared, storming into Aurora's office unannounced. "You can attack me, you can try to ruin my career, but going after a dead woman's reputation, have you completely lost your humanity?" Aurora looked up calmly from her desk. Humanity? That's rich, coming from someone who's throwing away generations of family legacy for, what? A girl from the wrong side of the tracks who's clearly using you to climb the social ladder. "You're wrong about her." Brandon's voice was deadly quiet. "And you're wrong about what makes a legacy worth protecting." But Aurora had one more card to play. "Am I?" Ask her about the scholarship controversy at her university. Ask her why she really switched schools in her junior year. Go ahead, Brandon. Ask her what she's been hiding. The seed of doubt was planted. When Brandon asked Aubrey about it that evening, her hesitation before answering felt like a confirmation of every suspicion Aurora had raised. "I was accused of plagiarism," Aubrey finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "A wealthy donor's daughter claimed I stole her work. It was a lie. I was cleared completely. But the experience was so traumatic that I transferred schools to escape the whispers." "Why didn't you tell me?" Brandon asked, hurt evident in his voice. "Because," Aubrey's eyes filled with tears, "every time I let myself believe I belong in your world, something happens to remind me that people like your sister will always see me as an outsider trying to steal what isn't mine." The moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Brandon did something that would change everything. He laughed. "My world," he said, pulling her close. "Aubrey, don't you see? I don't want that world. I want ours, the one we're building together." But even as they held each other, Aurora's plan was reaching its crescendo. She'd arranged for evidence of financial misconduct to be discovered in Rose Mitchell's old records. Evidence that would not only destroy her reputation, but implicate Aubrey in a decades-long cover-up. What Aurora hadn't counted on was Bryson's growing disillusionment with her crusade. That night, as she refined her plan, he confronted her one final time. "This obsession is destroying you," he said, watching his wife of 10 years become someone he barely recognized. "And for what? To protect some outdated idea of social hierarchy?" "You don't understand," Aurora spat. "This isn't about hierarchy, it's about protecting what's ours." "No," Bryson replied sadly, "it's about fear. Fear of change, fear of difference, fear of losing control, and I can't watch you destroy yourself and others because of it." He placed divorce papers on her desk before walking out, leaving Aurora alone with her schemes and her hatred. The next day would bring revelations that would shake the Cooper family to its foundations. But for tonight, in their partially renovated brownstone, Brandon and Aubrey lay on a makeshift bed of moving blankets, looking up at their future home's high ceilings. "Tell me about the kids your grandmother taught," Brandon whispered. "Tell me about the lives she changed." As Aubrey's stories filled the empty rooms with warmth and hope, across town, Aurora sat in her perfect penthouse, alone with her perfect plans and her imperfect heart, never suspecting that her greatest defeat would come not from her enemies, but from her own consuming hatred. Chapter 7. When Truth Prevails. The Price of Obsession. The Chicago Tribune building cast long shadows across the street as the sun set on what would become one of the most dramatic days in the Cooper family history. Inside her meticulous office, surrounded by the trappings of power and privilege, Aurora Cooper was about to learn that some victories come at an unimaginable cost. The evidence against Rose Mitchell's art program seemed irrefutable. Aurora had spent months crafting a narrative of financial mismanagement and deliberate deception that stretched back decades. Every detail was perfect, every document carefully aged and authenticated. It was her masterpiece of destruction. But she had overlooked one crucial detail. Her own obsession had made her careless. The morning began with Aurora's triumphant arrival at the Chicago Art Institute, where a specially convened board meeting would review the allegations against Rose Mitchell's legacy and, by extension, Aubrey's integrity. She wore a steel grey suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, her stilettos clicking against the marble floors like a countdown to destruction. Aubrey sat across the room, Brandon's hand steady on her shoulder. She wore a simple white dress that belonged to her grandmother, a silent testament to the legacy she was fighting to protect. Victoria Hayes sat beside her, a folder of their own evidence clutched tightly. "Before we begin," Victoria spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension, "I believe we have some relevant information about the source of these allegations." Aurora's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment, but it was enough. What followed was a masterclass in investigative journalism. Victoria, it turned out, had been conducting her own investigation, not into Rose Mitchell's art program, but into Aurora's obsessive campaign against Aubrey. The financial records showing mismanagement? Victoria laid out document after document. Fabricated, the witnesses claiming impropriety, paid actors, the evidence of long-term fraud. Created using state-of-the-art aging techniques by a specialist who, when confronted, was more than happy to reveal who hired him. The room erupted in murmurs as Victoria continued, methodically dismantling Aurora's carefully constructed house of cards, but the true bombshell was yet to come. "Most damning," Victoria's voice carried clear across the now silent room, "is this." She held up a phone. Recorded conversations between Ms. Cooper and various conspirators, planning not just the destruction of Rose Mitchell's reputation, but discussing methods to physically harm Aubrey if necessary. The color drained from Aurora's face. Those conversations had taken place in her private study, behind closed doors. How? "You weren't the only one who could hire private investigators," Bryson's voice came from the back of the room. He stepped forward, pain etched across his features. "I'm sorry, Aurora. But when I discovered how far you were willing to go, I had to act." The next hours passed in a blur of police statements and legal discussions. Aurora Cooper, pillar of Chicago society, was led away in handcuffs, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and attempted assault. The immaculate suit that had been her armor now seemed to hang on her like a prison uniform. But in the midst of this chaos, something extraordinary was happening in another part of the city. In the community center, where Rose Mitchell had once taught art to underprivileged children, Brandon and Aubrey stood before a room full of former students. Men and women who had found their voice, their purpose, their escape through Rose's programs. "She saved my life," one man testified, his voice thick with emotion. "When everyone else saw a troubled kid from the wrong side of tracks, Mrs. Mitchell saw an artist. Today, I run my own design firm, employing 20 people from this neighborhood." Story after story emerged, lives transformed, generations lifted, all because one woman believed that art could bridge any divide. The real legacy of Rose Mitchell wasn't in financial records or grant reports, it was in the lives she had touched. Back at their brownstone that evening, Brandon held Aubrey as she finally allowed herself to break down. The weight of months of fighting, of defending not just her love, but her very identity, crashed over her like a wave. "I feel sorry for her," Aubrey whispered, surprising them both. Aurora was so afraid of losing her world that she never realized she was destroying it herself. Brandon kissed her forehead gently. "Some people build walls, others build bridges. My sister never understood that protecting something doesn't mean keeping others out. It means making it strong enough to welcome them in. In her holding cell, Aurora sat alone with the ruins of her carefully constructed life. Her phone had been confiscated, but not before she'd seen the social media explosion. The Cooper family name was trending, but not for the reasons she'd fought so hard to protect. Instead, the story of her obsessive campaign against love had become a symbol of everything wrong with old money's resistance to change. Bryson filed for divorce the next morning. The Cooper Family Foundation, under Richard's direction, established a new grant program in Rose Mitchell's name, dedicated to funding arts education in underserved communities. And Brandon and Aubrey? They continued renovating their brownstone, creating a space that bridged their two worlds. But the story's most poignant moment came 3 months later at the opening of the new Performing Arts Center. In the main lobby hung a massive canvas, a collaborative piece created by former students of Rose Mitchell's program. At its center, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a small photograph. Rose Mitchell standing in her first classroom, surrounded by children from all walks of life, their hands covered in paint and their faces bright with possibility. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "Art knows no boundaries. Neither does love." Aurora, awaiting trial, would see the photo in the newspaper, and for the first time, sitting in her cell, she would begin to understand the magnitude of what she had tried to destroy, and the cost of her own prejudice. As for Aubrey and Brandon, they had learned that love doesn't just survive adversity, it thrives on it. Each attack had only served to make their bond stronger, their purpose clearer, their commitment to building bridges instead of walls more resolute. "You know," Brandon said one evening, as they sat on their newly finished rooftop garden, watching the sun set over their Chicago, "sometimes I think Aurora did us a favor." Aubrey raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Think about it," he continued. "Every time she tried to break us apart, she just proved how unbreakable we are. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies give you is the opportunity to discover your own strength." That strength would be tested again in the months to come, as Aurora's trial approached and old wounds were reopened. But for now, in the warm glow of the setting sun, surrounded by the garden they had built together, Aubrey and Brandon held on to the truth they had fought so hard to prove, that love, real love, doesn't divide worlds, it creates new ones. Let me continue with a compelling narrative that incorporates these elements of human potential, transformation, and triumph through adversity. Chapter 8. The Trial of Truth. When Justice Meets Redemption. The Richard J. Daley Center Courthouse stood imposing against Chicago's winter sky, its brutalist architecture a fitting backdrop for the drama about to unfold. The trial of Aurora Cooper had drawn media attention from across the nation, not just for the sensational nature of her crimes, but for what the case represented about privilege, prejudice, and the changing face of American society. Aubrey sat in the witness stand, her voice steady as she recounted months of harassment, manipulation, and escalating threats. Her simple black dress and natural hair made a striking contrast to Aurora's designer suit and perfectly coiffed appearance. But it was Aubrey's dignity, her refusal to be broken, that captured the jury's attention. "The art program my grandmother ran wasn't just about teaching children to paint," Aubrey testified, her voice carrying clear across the hushed courtroom. "It was about showing them they had the power to create something beautiful in a world that often told them they didn't belong. That's what Aurora tried to destroy, not just my relationship with Brandon, but the very idea that worlds could merge, that love could bridge any divide." The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Text messages, recorded conversations, bank transfers to hired conspirators, each piece of evidence revealed the depths of Aurora's obsession, but it was Bryson's testimony that dealt the final blow. "I watched the woman I loved disappear into her hatred," he testified, unable to meet Aurora's eyes. She became so focused on maintaining what she saw as social order that she lost her own humanity in the process. As the trial progressed, something unexpected began to happen. The story transcended the personal drama of the Cooper family, becoming a mirror reflecting deeper societal issues. Opinion pieces discussed the case as a symbol of resistance to change in established institutions. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Aubrey and Brandon's love story. The defense tried to paint Aurora as a victim of her own privileged upbringing, trapped by societal expectations and family pressure. But their arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence showing the calculated nature of her actions. Then came the moment that changed everything. During cross-examination, Aurora finally broke. Years of maintaining perfect control crumbled under the weight of truth. "You want to know why?" she screamed, her composure shattering. "Because she threatened everything, not just with her background or her color, but with her authenticity. People loved her for who she was, while I've spent my entire life being who I was supposed to be. She didn't just take my brother. She exposed the emptiness of everything I'd built my life around." The courtroom fell silent. In that raw moment of honesty, Aurora revealed more than any evidence could. She wasn't just fighting against Aubrey and Brandon's relationship. She was fighting against the change they represented, the proof that all her carefully maintained barriers were ultimately meaningless. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. As Aurora was led away to begin her 3-year sentence, she caught a glimpse of Brandon and Aubrey in the gallery. They weren't celebrating. Instead, there was a sadness in their eyes, not for the justice served, but for the waste of so much energy on hatred. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected changes. Richard Cooper, finally confronting the toxic culture he'd helped create, announced major reforms in family business practices. The Cooper Foundation launched initiatives specifically focused on promoting diversity in arts and architecture. But the most profound changes were personal. In the quiet moments after the verdict, Brandon and Aubrey returned to their brownstone, now a warm blend of both their worlds. The renovation was complete, each room telling the story of their journey together. "I've been thinking," Brandon said as they sat in their garden that evening, "about what Aurora said about authenticity." Aubrey looked up from the architectural plans she was reviewing. Their next project was a community arts center inspired by her grandmother's program. "We should start a mentorship program," he continued, "for young artists and architects from underserved communities, not just funding, but real guidance, real opportunities." Aubrey smiled, remembering her grandmother's words, "When you lift others up, you build stairs to heaven." The story of their love had become something bigger than themselves. It had exposed the cracks in old systems, challenged deeply rooted prejudices, and shown that real change was possible. Even Aurora, in her prison cell, was beginning to change. She requested books about civil rights history, about systemic inequality, about the very things she'd spent her life ignoring. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. 3 months after the trial, Brandon and Aubrey hosted a gallery opening in their home. The walls showcased work from emerging artists alongside established names. The guests were a mix of society figures and community members, all brought together by art and possibility. In one corner hung a special piece, a collaborative work created by students from their new mentorship program. It showed a bridge being built between 2 different worlds, with a simple quote beneath, "Love doesn't divide worlds, it creates new ones." Looking at the piece, Aubrey felt her grandmother's presence strongly. Rose Mitchell had known what Aurora had taken so long to learn, that true strength lies not in maintaining barriers, but in having the courage to break them down. I'll craft Chapter 9 with deep emotional resonance and compelling storytelling, focusing on transformation and human potential while maintaining the dramatic tension that has built throughout the story. Chapter 9. Legacy of Love. Transforming lives beyond boundaries. The spring sun painted Chicago's skyline in hues of gold and promise as Aubrey stood before a room full of aspiring artists and architects. The newly established Mitchell Cooper Foundation's mentorship program had attracted talent from every corner of the city, each face shining with the same hunger for opportunity that had once driven her. "Your background doesn't define your future," she began, her voice carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of triumph. "What matters is your vision, your determination, and your courage to create something new in a world that often resists change." The renovated warehouse space that housed their program was a testament to that philosophy. Once abandoned, now transformed, its industrial bones softened by artwork and flooded with natural light. Brandon had designed the renovation himself, incorporating elements that paid homage to both their journeys. Exposed brick walls displaying street art alongside classical architectural elements, creating a space where different worlds didn't just meet, but melded. In her prison cell, Aurora Cooper was undergoing her own transformation. The woman who had once orchestrated elaborate schemes to protect her social status now spent hours reading letters from people whose lives had been touched by Rose Mitchell's original art program. Each story challenged her long-held beliefs about worth, privilege, and belonging. One letter in particular had shaken her to her core. "Dear Ms. Cooper, I was 12 when Mrs. Mitchell found me spray painting behind her art school. Instead of calling the police, she handed me a canvas. Art isn't about breaking things," she told me. "It's about building something new." Today, I'm a successful architect, designing affordable housing that brings beauty to communities like the one I grew up in. Your actions didn't just attack Aubrey, they attacked everything your brother and she represent. The possibility that love and talent know no boundaries. Marcus Rodriguez, Principal Architect, Rodriguez and Associates. The letter had left tear stains on its pages, though Aurora would never admit to crying. Meanwhile, Brandon and Aubrey's influence continued to grow. Their mentorship program expanded to include internships at major firms, scholarships for art and architecture students, and community projects that brought together established professionals with emerging talent from underserved areas. "It's not just about giving opportunities," Brandon explained to a journalist covering their initiative. "It's about changing the entire conversation around who belongs in these spaces and who gets to create our city's future." Their brownstone had become a gathering place for this new vision of Chicago's artistic community. Weekly salons brought together students, professionals, and community leaders for discussions that broke down traditional barriers. The rooftop garden, now a lush oasis, hosted exhibitions that combined classical techniques with street art aesthetics. But perhaps the most powerful transformation was happening in unexpected places. Richard Cooper, watching his son and daughter-in-law build something revolutionary from the ashes of prejudice, began his own journey of change. The Cooper family's business practices underwent a complete overhaul, with new initiatives focused on diversity and community engagement. "I was wrong," he admitted during a foundation board meeting. "For generations, we thought we were protecting something precious by keeping others out. What we were really doing was building prison walls around ourselves." 1 year after the trial, Aubrey received an unexpected letter from Aurora. "Dear Aubrey, words feel inadequate after everything I've done. But in here, watching the news about your programs, reading about the lives you're changing, I'm beginning to understand what I fought so hard against wasn't you. It was the possibility that everything I believed about worth and belonging might be wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that you and Brandon didn't just build a bridge between worlds. You showed there never should have been separate worlds to begin with. Aurora. The letter arrived on the morning of a significant announcement. The Mitchell Cooper Foundation was launching its most ambitious project yet, a nationwide initiative to transform abandoned buildings into combined living and working spaces for artists and architects from underrepresented communities. This isn't just about creating spaces, Aubrey explained at the press conference, Brandon's hand steady in hers. It's about creating possibilities. Every person who dares to dream deserves a chance to build that dream into reality. The project's first success story came from an unexpected quarter. Upon her release, Aurora asked to be involved, not as a Cooper scion, but as someone who had learned the hard way about the cost of prejudice. Her experience in finance, stripped of its former elitism, proved valuable in making the project sustainable. Redemption, she told Bryson when they finally met for coffee 2 years after the trial, isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a different future. Their programs continued to grow, touching lives across the city and beyond. Each success story added another brushstroke to the canvas they were creating, a masterpiece of possibility painted in the colors of diversity, acceptance, and love. One evening, as they stood in their rooftop garden watching the sun set over their transformed city, Brandon wrapped his arms around Aubrey from behind, his hand resting gently on her growing belly, their first child, a daughter, due in the summer. "Your grandmother would be proud," he whispered. "We're not just continuing her legacy, we're expanding it in ways she might never have imagined." Aubrey smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here. From that first meeting in the gallery to the trials they'd faced, every step had led to this moment, not just personal happiness, but the joy of creating real change in the world. "She used to say that art is like love," Aubrey replied, leaning back against him. "It doesn't diminish when shared, it multiplies." As the city lights began to twinkle around them, their home filled with the voices of another salon gathering below, they stood in peaceful silence, witnesses to the power of love to not just overcome boundaries, but to render them meaningless. In her studio downtown, Victoria Hayes was putting the finishing touches on a book chronicling the Mitchell Cooper story, its pages filled with testimonials from lives transformed. The final chapter ended with a quote from one of their first mentorship students. "They didn't just teach us how to create art or design buildings, they taught us that love is the ultimate act of creation. Whether it's love for another person, love for your community, or love for the possibility of change. And once you understand that, there's no limit to what you can build." Chapter 10. Seeds of Tomorrow. A legacy blooms. The Chicago Tribune's Sunday magazine featured a striking cover photo. A young black girl, about 5 years old, standing between her parents in their rooftop garden. The headline read, "Rose Cooper Mitchell, growing up in a world her parents built." The article would become a symbol of how far the city had come and how far it still had to go. Little Rose, named after both her great-grandmother and the flower that symbolized love's ability to bloom in unlikely places, had inherited her mother's artistic eye and her father's analytical mind. But more importantly, she had inherited something that couldn't be seen, the legacy of two people who had dared to love beyond boundaries. The Mitchell Cooper Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a mentorship program had evolved into a nationwide movement, transforming not just individual lives, but entire communities. Their model of combining artistic vision with architectural innovation had created spaces where diversity wasn't just welcomed, it was celebrated. One morning, as Rose helped Aubrey water the rooftop plants, she asked the kind of question that only children can. "Mommy, why does Aunt Aurora's voice sound different?" When she visits. Aubrey paused, remembering the long journey that had led to Aurora's eventual redemption. After serving her sentence, Aurora had dedicated herself to the Foundation's work, but the weight of her past actions still showed in subtle ways, like the careful hesitation in her voice whenever she visited her niece. "Sometimes, sweetheart," Aubrey explained, "people have to learn hard lessons about love. Your Aunt Aurora learned that protecting something doesn't mean keeping others out. It means making room for everyone to grow." Brandon found them there later, Rose perched on her mother's lap, as Aubrey told stories about great-grandmother Rose's first art class. He couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The Cooper family name, once synonymous with exclusivity, now represented innovation and inclusion. The Foundation's latest project was its most ambitious yet, transforming abandoned industrial spaces across the country into combined living-working communities for artists and architects from underrepresented backgrounds. Each space was designed to foster collaboration between established professionals and emerging talents. Aurora, surprisingly, had become one of the program's strongest advocates. Her experience in prison had taught her lessons about humanity that no amount of privilege could have provided. She now led the Foundation's outreach to conservative donors, using her own story of transformation to challenge long-held prejudices. "I used to think power meant controlling who got in," she told a group of potential investors. "Now I understand that real power lies in opening doors for others." The impact of their work rippled through Chicago's social fabric. The annual Mitchell Cooper Foundation Gala had become the city's most prestigious event, not because of its exclusivity, but because of its ability to bring together people from all walks of life. Fortune 500 CEOs mingled with community artists, while emerging architects shared ideas with established masters. One evening, during one such gala, Rose tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing to a massive mural that dominated the Foundation's main hall. "Daddy, tell me the story again," she pleaded. Brandon lifted his daughter, noting how her eyes, so like her mother's, traced the mural's intricate details. The piece had been created by students from their first mentorship cohort, depicting the journey from separation to unity, from fear to love. "Once upon a time," he began, "there was a man who thought he knew everything about beauty, until he met a woman who showed him what beauty really means." Across the room, Aubrey watched them, her heart full. The Foundation's latest reports showed that their programs had helped launch over 1,000 careers, created dozens of thriving community spaces, and inspired similar initiatives around the world. Victoria Hayes, now the Foundation's Director of Education, approached with a tablet displaying their newest project proposals. "We're changing the world," she said simply, "one space at a time." "No," Aubrey corrected gently, watching her daughter gesture excitedly as Brandon continued the story. "We're building a new one." That night, after the gala, the family gathered in their rooftop garden. The city stretched out before them, its lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. Rose had fallen asleep between her parents, her small hand clutching a sketch she'd made, a childish but touching representation of their family, surrounded by flowers and buildings that touched the sky. Aurora, who had lingered after the other guests left, watched them from the doorway. The guilt of her past actions would never completely fade, but it had been transformed into something productive, a drive to help create the kind of world she had once fought against. "She's the future we were all fighting for," Aurora said softly, looking at her niece. "A child who never has to question whether love has boundaries." Brandon and Aubrey exchanged glances over their daughter's sleeping form. Their love story had become more than just their own. It had become a blueprint for change, a testament to the possibility of transformation, and a legacy that would continue through their daughter and beyond. The next morning, Rose would attend the opening of another community art space, would watch her parents cut the ribbon together, would see the pride in her Aunt Aurora's eyes as another bridge was built between worlds that once seemed impossibly far apart. But for now, under the stars, surrounded by the garden they had grown together, they were simply a family, living proof that love, when given room to bloom, can transform not just hearts, but entire worlds. Chapter 11. The Seeds of Legacy. A world transformed. 20 years after that starlit evening in the rooftop garden, Rose Cooper Mitchell stood at the podium of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Urban Development. At 30, she had become a force of nature in her own right, carrying forward a legacy that had started with a love story and grown into a global movement. The grand hall fell silent as she began to speak, her presence commanding attention just as her parents had done decades before. "My earliest memories," Rose began, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had characterized her mother's, "are of a garden in the sky. A place where my parents proved that beauty could grow anywhere if you had the courage to plant the seeds." The Mitchell Cooper Foundation had evolved beyond its founder's wildest dreams. What began as a Chicago-based initiative had blossomed into an international force for change, with sustainable community development projects on 6 continents. Each project carried the core philosophy that had started with a young curator and an architect who dared to love across society's boundaries. Earlier that morning, Rose had visited their latest project in Harlem, a revolutionary urban development that combined affordable housing with state-of-the-art cultural spaces. The building's design, a collaboration between foundation mentees and established architects, told its own story of transformation. Solar panels gleamed like scales against recycled brick, while community gardens cascaded down terraced levels, creating a vertical oasis in the urban landscape. "Architecture isn't just about buildings," she continued, echoing her father's words. "It's about creating spaces where dreams can take root and grow." In the audience, Brandon and Aubrey watched their daughter with quiet pride. Their hair had grown silver, but their eyes still held the same fire that had once challenged Chicago's social order. They sat beside Aurora, who had become one of the Foundation's most powerful advocates for change. Aurora's own journey of redemption had become legendary in its own right. After her release from prison, she had dedicated her life to dismantling the very systems of privilege she had once fought to protect. Her corporate connections, once used to maintain social barriers, now served to channel resources into communities that needed them most. "My aunt taught me," Rose acknowledged, nodding toward Aurora, "that transformation isn't just possible, it's essential. That our greatest strength lies not in maintaining walls, but in building bridges." The presentation screen behind her showcased the Foundation's latest initiative, Project Bloom, a global network of sustainable cultural centers, each designed to nurture local talent while fostering international collaboration. The architectural renderings showed spaces that seemed to defy gravity, where art and nature intertwined in harmony with urban environments. In the front row, Victoria Hayes, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, smiled knowingly. She had watched Rose grow from a curious child into a visionary leader, combining her mother's artistic sensitivity with her father's architectural innovation and adding her own unique passion for environmental justice. After the presentation, the family gathered in the UN building's rooftop garden, a space that had been redesigned under Rose's direction as a pilot project for urban agricultural integration. The New York skyline stretched before them, a canvas of possibility. "Do you remember," Aubrey asked, touching a flowering vine that reminded her of their first rooftop garden, when you used to ask us to tell you our story every night before bed. Rose smiled, remembering those precious moments. I used to think it was just a love story, she replied, but it was really a blueprint for changing the world. Brandon wrapped an arm around his wife, noting how the years had only deepened their connection. Every love story has the potential to change the world, he said. We just had the courage to let ours do it. Aurora watched her niece examine a new hydroponic system being tested in the garden. She has your spirit, she told Aubrey softly, and my determination, but thankfully, she's using it for better purposes than I did. The afternoon sun painted the city in hues of gold and promise, much like it had done on that autumn day when Brandon and Aubrey first met at the art gallery. But now, their love story had grown beyond two people defying social conventions. It had become a movement, a philosophy, a way of seeing the world not as it was, but as it could be. As the family prepared to leave for the Foundation's anniversary gala, Rose paused to take in the view one last time. Below, the city hummed with life, lives that had been touched, transformed, and uplifted by the legacy of love her parents had built. You know, she said, turning to her parents, great-grandmother Rose once told you that art could save lives. But what you proved is that love is the greatest art of all, the art of building new worlds. That evening, as the gala celebrated decades of transformation and progress, Rose announced the Foundation's most ambitious project yet, a worldwide initiative to create self-sustaining cultural communities in conflict zones, using art and architecture as tools for peace-building. And in the audience, Brandon and Aubrey held hands, just as they had done at countless events before, knowing that their love story hadn't just changed their world, it had helped create a new one, where future generations would know that the only boundaries that matter are the ones we choose to break. Chapter 12. The Symphony of Change, a World Without Boundaries. December. After many years, dawned with a promise of something extraordinary. The Mitchell Cooper Foundation's centennial celebration coincided with the completion of their most ambitious project yet, the Global Harmony Initiative. Rose Cooper Mitchell, now in her 50s, stood atop the Foundation's new headquarters, a revolutionary structure that seemed to dance between earth and sky. The building itself told their story. Living walls breathed life into recycled materials, while solar-capturing surfaces transformed sunlight into energy with unprecedented efficiency. But it was more than just sustainable architecture. It was a testament to how far they'd come from that first rooftop garden where a young girl had once asked her parents to tell her their love story. "Mom!" called a voice that made Rose turn. Her daughter, Aubrey Aurora Cooper Mitchell, named for both her grandmother and great-aunt, approached with the confident stride of her 20 years. Like her namesakes, young Aubrey had inherited the fire of purpose that characterized the Cooper Mitchell legacy, but with her own unique vision. "The delegates from the African Union have arrived," Aubrey announced. "They're excited to see the neural interface demonstration." The Neural Architecture Interface was young Aubrey's contribution to their family legacy, a revolutionary system that allowed communities to collectively design their spaces through shared mental imagery. It was technology meets artistry meets community empowerment, representing the next evolution of their mission to break down barriers. In the main atrium below, Brandon and Aubrey Sr. watched the proceedings with quiet pride. Though both were now in their 70s, their love still radiated with the same intensity that had once scandalized Chicago society. They sat close together, fingers intertwined, as they observed their granddaughter guide the African delegation through the interface demonstration. "Remember when we thought transforming Chicago was ambitious?" Aubrey Sr. mused, her silver hair catching the light that streamed through the bio-responsive windows. Brandon squeezed her hand gently. You always saw further than anyone else. It's why I fell in love with you. Aurora, who had become an integral part of their extended family despite her rocky beginning, joined them with assistance from her hover support chair. Age had softened her features but strengthened her conviction. Her redemption story had become a powerful testament to the possibility of change, inspiring countless others to confront their own prejudices. The neural interface is revolutionary, Aurora commented, watching her great-niece work. But what makes it truly special is how it democratizes design. Everyone's voice matters. Everyone's vision counts. The demonstration area hummed with excitement as young Aubrey connected minds across continents, allowing communities separated by thousands of miles to collectively imagine and design shared spaces. On the massive holoscreens, their combined creativity manifested in real time. Structures that defied conventional architecture while honoring cultural heritage. Rose made her way down to join her family, remembering how this all started. Her parents' love story hadn't just changed their lives. It had sparked a revolution in how people thought about space, community, and belonging. The Mitchell Cooper Foundation now operated on every continent, its projects ranging from quantum sustainable housing to orbital art installations. Ladies and gentlemen, Rose addressed the gathered crowd, her voice carrying the weight of legacy and the lightness of possibility. What you're witnessing isn't just technological innovation. It's the culmination of a journey that began nearly 60 years ago when two people dared to love across boundaries that seemed insurmountable. The atrium's smart glass walls shifted to display images from their history. The original art gallery, where Brandon and Aubrey met, their first rooftop garden, the early community projects, and the gradual transformation of cities around the world. Each image told a story of barriers broken, bridges built, and lives transformed. Today, Rose continued, we're not just breaking down walls, we're making them obsolete. The neural interface allows us to see through each other's eyes, to dream together, to build spaces that reflect our shared humanity while celebrating our unique perspectives. Young Aubrey took over, her hands dancing through the holographic interface as she explained the technical aspects of the system. But it was more than technology on display. It was the fruition of a legacy built on love, courage, and the unwavering belief that art and architecture could heal the world's divisions. As the day progressed, the celebration evolved into a global event. Quantum-linked celebrations sprang up in Mitchell Cooper centers around the world, each adding their own cultural flourishes to the shared joy. In Mumbai, dancers performed among floating light sculptures. In Lagos, traditional drummers collaborated with AI composers. In São Paulo, vertical gardens burst into synchronized bloom. Later that evening, in a quiet moment between celebrations, 4 generations of the Cooper-Mitchell family gathered in the rooftop sanctuary of their headquarters. The space was a perfect fusion of the natural and the technological, living plants intertwined with quantum sensors, while butterflies, both organic and nano-robotic, fluttered among the foliage. "Tell me again," young Aubrey asked, settling beside her great-grandmother, "about the first time you and Grandpa met, about how love can change the world." Aubrey Sr. smiled, looking at Brandon, then at their daughter Rose, and finally at their granddaughter, each generation taking their legacy further than they could have imagined. The story had been told countless times, but its power never diminished. "It began," she started, "on an autumn evening in Chicago, when a young curator and an architect discovered that love doesn't just cross boundaries, it erases them entirely." As the story unfolded once again, the city lights below twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the vast tapestry of time and space, A young art teacher named Rose Mitchell smiled at what her simple belief in the power of art and love had spawned. The world had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible 60 years ago. But as young Aubrey's neural interface showed, they were just beginning. The next chapter of their legacy was already being written, one shared dream at a time. Chapter 13, Beyond Stars, Legacy of Infinite Dreams. In the crystalline dome of Harmony 1, Earth's first artistic space colony, young Aubrey Cooper Mitchell stood before a gathering of humanity's boldest dreamers. At 25, she had taken her family's legacy beyond the boundaries of Earth itself, proving that art and innovation could flourish even among the stars. Mitchell Cooper Foundation had evolved into something its founders could hardly have imagined. What began as a love story between a curator and an architect in Chicago had blossomed into a movement that now reached toward the cosmos. Space! Young Aubrey addressed the assembled crowd, her voice carrying the same passionate conviction that had characterized her great-grandparents. Isn't just humanity's next frontier, it's our greatest canvas. Behind her, the neural architecture interface she had pioneered displayed a real-time visualization of collective human creativity. Thousands of minds, both on Harmony 1 and back on Earth, were connected through quantum networks, their shared imagination manifesting in stunning architectural possibilities that defied traditional physics while honoring human needs for beauty and community. Rose, now the Foundation's global director, watched her daughter with pride. At 55, she had overseen the Foundation's expansion into space exploration, but it was young Aubrey who had truly revolutionized their approach to creating communities among the stars. The Harmony 1 colony itself was a testament to their evolution. Its biomorphic architecture responded to both environmental needs and aesthetic desires. Living walls filtered air while creating breathtaking artistic displays. Quantum-enabled windows shifted between transparency and opacity based on collective colony preferences, creating shared experiences of Earth's sunrises and sunsets. But the true innovation lay in young Aubrey's latest project, the Cosmic Confluence Initiative. Using advanced neural interface technology, the program allowed Earthbound communities to participate in space colony design, ensuring that humanity's expansion into space remained connected to its roots. My great-grandparents taught us that love knows no boundaries, young Aubrey continued, her hands dancing through holographic displays. They proved it on Earth, and now we're proving it among the stars. In the front row, Brandon and Aubrey Sr., now in their 80s but still radiating the same powerful love that had started it all, held hands as they watched their legacy soar beyond their wildest dreams. Aurora, now in her final years but still sharp-minded, sat beside them, her redemption story having become a cornerstone of the Foundation's philosophy about transformation and second chances. The presentation shifted to showcase their newest initiative, quantum-linked cultural exchanges between Earth communities and space colonies. Through neural interface technology, artists in Mumbai could collaborate with colonists on Mars, while architects in Lagos could help design new habitats on Europa. But technology alone isn't enough, young Aubrey emphasized, her voice carrying the wisdom of generations. What makes these spaces truly revolutionary is the same thing that transformed Chicago all those years ago, the courage to imagine a world without barriers and the love to make that imagination reality. The demonstration that followed left the Bayshore audience breathless. Using the neural interface, young Aubrey connected minds across the solar system in real time. Together, they designed new spaces that merged Earth's cultural heritage with the unique challenges and opportunities of space colonization. Later that evening, in the colony's artificial garden, modeled after that first rooftop sanctuary in Chicago, 4 generations of Cooper Mitchells gathered for a more intimate celebration. The Earth hung like a brilliant jewel in the vast window, a constant reminder of where their journey had begun. "Tell me again," young Aubrey asked her great-grandparents, just as she had done countless times before, about how it all started, about the art gallery and the love that changed everything. Brandon and Aubrey Sr. exchanged glances, their love having only deepened with the passing years. The story had been told countless times, but its power to inspire remained undiminished. "It began," Aubrey Sr. started, her voice soft with memory, "when two people dared to believe that love was stronger than prejudice, that art could bridge any divide, and that together we could build something beautiful." As the story unfolded once more, young Aubrey's neural interface picked up the emotional resonance of the moment, transforming their shared memories into a stunning visual display that danced across the colony's walls. Earth's first space artists, watching from their studios, began incorporating these emotions into their works, creating a real-time symphony of memory, love, and possibility. The chapter continues to explore how their legacy evolves in space, showing how each generation takes the core values of love, innovation, and inclusion to new frontiers while staying true to the simple truth that started it all, that love knows no boundaries, not even those between worlds. Chapter 14. Love's Eternal Legacy, a Message of Hope and Healing. In the crystalline observation deck of Harmony. 1. As Earth hung like a luminous pearl against the velvet backdrop of space, generations of the Cooper-Mitchell family gathered for what would be their most profound celebration yet. It was the 75th wedding anniversary of Brandon and Aubrey Sr., and their love story had become more than just a family legend. It had become a beacon of hope across worlds. Young Aubrey had transformed the entire dome into an immersive memory theater using her neural interface technology. Images from the past 7 decades danced around them. The first meeting at the art gallery, the rooftop garden where their love had flourished despite opposition, the trials they had overcome, and the legacy they had built. But this celebration was about more than just their family's triumph. It was a testament to every woman who had ever faced betrayal, prejudice, or loss because of someone else's jealousy or hatred. Rose stood at the center of the gathering, her silver hair catching starlight as she addressed not just those present, but millions watching through quantum links across Earth and its colonies. "My parents' story," she began, her voice carrying the weight of generations, "wasn't just about love conquering prejudice. It was about women rising from the ashes of betrayal to build something greater than their pain." The neural interface responded to her emotions, projecting images of countless women who had found strength and purpose through the Mitchell Cooper Foundation's programs over the decades. Artists who had been told they didn't belong, architects whose dreams had been dismissed, lovers separated by societal prejudices, all who had found their way back to joy. Aurora, now in her final years, spoke next. Her voice, though fragile with age, carried the power of hard-won wisdom. "I was once the villain of this story. My jealousy and fear nearly destroyed something beautiful. But even from that darkness, transformation was possible. To every woman who has been the Aurora of someone else's story, change is possible. Redemption is possible. Love is possible." Young Aubrey activated a special feature of the neural interface, one she had created specifically for this moment. Suddenly, the dome filled with messages from women across the solar system, testimonials of survival, triumph, and renewal. A holographic figure appeared, a woman from New Mumbai. "My husband's family tore us apart because I wasn't from their caste. The foundation gave me purpose. Now I design quantum architecture for lunar colonies." Another from Lagos. "When my wife's parents disowned her for loving me, we thought our world had ended. Today we run the Foundation's largest African art collective. Message after message, story after story, building into a symphony of resilience and hope. Brandon and Aubrey Sr., still holding hands after 75 years, watched with tears in their eyes as their love story continued to heal hearts across worlds. Aubrey Sr. stood, her voice strong despite her years. To every woman watching who has been told she's not enough, who has been betrayed, abandoned, or broken, your pain is not your destiny. It's the cocoon from which your true self will emerge. The neural interface captured her emotions, transforming them into a stunning display of butterflies made of light, each carrying messages of hope and transformation throughout the colony. Your worth, she continued, is not determined by those who couldn't see your light. Your love story isn't over because someone tried to write its ending. You are the author of your own destiny. Young Aubrey then revealed her anniversary gift, a quantum-enabled monument that would float in space between Earth and Harmony One. Named the Phoenix Sphere, it would serve as a perpetual sanctuary for healing hearts, using neural interface technology to connect those in pain with those who had survived and thrived. As the celebration drew to a close, 4 generations of Cooper Mitchell women stood together, their joined hands creating a circle of unbroken strength. The neural interface responded to their combined emotional resonance, creating a breathtaking display of cosmic art that rippled across the colony's dome. Rose spoke one final time, her words meant for every wounded heart across the worlds. Love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming so completely yourself that no one's jealousy, hatred, or fear can diminish your light. Our family's legacy isn't just about what we built. It's about what we rebuilt from broken pieces. The message spread across quantum networks, reaching into homes and hearts throughout the solar system. To every woman who has been wounded by jealousy, your pain is not your endpoint. Your betrayal is not your destiny. Your broken heart is not your final chapter. Rise, create, love again. Because the greatest revenge against hatred is not more hatred, it's building something so beautiful that it transforms the very world that tried to break you. You are not alone. You are not finished. You are just beginning. As Earth's light mingled with starshine, casting rainbow refractions through the dome's quantum crystals, the Cooper Mitchell Women's Circle became a symbol of an eternal truth. That love, real love, doesn't just heal hearts, it builds new worlds from their healing.